have Sam Altman being like, I'm killing Sora, I'm killing the web browser because I spread myself too thin. And you're like, that's coming from the guy who just raised, what, $130 billion or something? If Anthropic starts to beat OpenAI by niching down to a use case, maybe the startups can as well, right? Sam Altman to say, wow, we have a focus problem, which is ironic given he's behind Y Combinator and they've been telling companies they need to focus for the last 20 or 30 years. Even he now is like, oh shoot, even I need to do it.
Honestly, most startup founders right now are solving for the wrong problems, trying to appease instead of focusing on getting their positioning right. My guest today, Anthony Pierri, who is one of the most notable voices in product marketing, having worked with more than 400 startups till today. We wanted to understand why so many AI startups tend to wither away under the next Claude or ChatGPT update. However, some survive and yet thrive in this environment. Enjoy this episode. I'll see you very soon. On popular public demand, I was actually able to pull this off, which I never thought I would actually be able to do. I've gotten Anthony Pierri of all people. First of all, Anthony, so thank you so much for taking out the time and being here. And second of all, I know I said this offline, but I have to say it here, love your content. And yeah, it's great to dive into it.
Definitely. Thanks so much for having me. Super excited to be here.
Awesome. So to kick this off, when a company thinks about hiring you and they think that positioning is a branding problem or a messaging problem, and they come to you and they're thinking about, why is it Fletch PMM? Why is this a product problem, not a brand problem? I think even a few marketers might think positioning is a brand problem, not a product problem. How do you talk to those people?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really comes down to brand and product complement each other in a bunch of ways. Like, we were watching, there's a big golf tournament, the Masters. I'm not really a golfer, but a friend of mine had me over and, he had a bunch of people over, we're all watching. And one of the main people golfing, he's got a nice polo on and it's got a big Workday logo, which is like enterprise software. That to me is like quintessential brand marketing in the sense that it's really doesn't tell me anything about Workday, but now I have an association. Oh, interesting. I've heard of Workday, or maybe I've never heard of them. What's Workday? If you strip away everything and you're just marketing the brand, that's kind of an example, right? And so brand positioning, it has its own whole thing where it's like, what does Apple stand for? What kind of a company are we? And they have so many different product lines and do so many different things. And so brand work at the level of a company like Apple is, what does Apple stand for as a company across everything they do? How do we want to show up? How do we want people to think about us? How do we want to be perceived? What do we stand for? Our vision, our values. So that work is very, very valuable. But at the individual product level, there also is a positioning conversation that has to happen. And that is what we would call product positioning. And it is different. It is much more about, how do I explain this product in a way that will make it make sense to the people that I want to sell it to, make them ideally want to buy it, want to use it, stick with it, feel like it's for them. Or if it's not for them, opt out and say, oh, actually, this isn't something that I would need. Let's not waste everyone's time if it's not going to be a good fit. So these two things play a complementary role. And you could argue that all product marketing is also brand marketing, but not all brand marketing is product marketing, if that makes sense, right? When Apple is showing me the new AirPods, they're also communicating something about the broader brand of what does Apple stand for and who are they and what's their aesthetic and all that stuff. But there is ways that you can do brand marketing that doesn't actually talk about any of the product, right? You see Patagonia, they're a big company out here. They do a lot of sustainability stuff, and it's like showing what do they stand for. And they can do that without necessarily highlighting, here's my jacket that I'm going to buy from you, right? Or here's the clothes that we make. They can show stuff that they care about, sponsor things. So there's ways to do brand marketing that doesn't have to do with product marketing. But in our sense, we are much more focused on the product positioning aspect, which gets us into conversations of like, what is it? What is the product? What does it do? And that can sometimes create really interesting conversations because some founders they don't want to share with the public what they really do. And we could talk about reasons why that is, but that's where a lot of the rubber meets the road of really getting into the nitty gritty of the product. Well, what is this thing? And then kind of realizing, maybe there's a reason you're not telling anyone what it is on your website or your marketing materials, and you're kind of retreating to that brand marketing, brand positioning space, which doesn't necessarily help them.
It's a good parallel to draw into my next question, which was actually going to be around a lot of the, let's say, discovery of I don't even know what my product is right now, especially with chat native AI products that are trying to be as broad as possible. And you talk about this problem as well, because it drives from founders being so obsessed with fundraising early stage. But talk to me about when a lot of the steps that you're talking about right now are definitely more oriented towards a human opening the homepage, going through it, to now them talking to a chat GPT or perplexity, whatever that is, with that having the context of the user. And a lot of the legwork that they were doing of reading the homepage and figuring out the pain points is not being done by them. It's done being done by an agent or AI LLM. In that case, does the positioning framework change, or do you feel like it still remains the same?
From what I understand, how these LLMs work is they mimic what people are doing. And in the same way that good SEO practice was around how can I provide the most helpful information, answer people's questions, really be clear about these things. From what I understand, and I'm not a AEO, GEO, whatever you want to call it, expert, essentially it's the same underlying thing, but the LLMs are just even smarter and more human like. So whether it's a human opening it or an LLM opening it, I do think that there are big benefits to just being very clear. We fall in this bucket, or this is how you can think about us. This is where you can sort us. This is what we compete with. This is what you can compare us to. What makes us different? All those types of things that a human would want to know. I think an LLM would want to know as well. And I try to tell people, like, you're going to tweak the homepage. Like, whatever we get you with is just a starting point of the copy. You can do A/B tests. You can do whatever you want to tweak it over the next 12, 18 months. The stuff that we're more concerned with are, did you really actually make a longer term positioning bet? And are you willing to say it? Are you willing to stand behind it? Are you willing to bring the same arguments throughout the rest of your go to market? And for us, seeing it on a homepage really clarifies whether they actually are going to do it or not. And for them, sometimes we'll leave week one where we get it all written out and they say, yes, that's the strategy. I'm on board. We're all on board. This is going to be great. And then we take the identical information and put it in something that looks like a homepage. And then they say, oh no, actually, I don't know that we can do the strategy. Because something about seeing it in that format just makes it real. And then all of a sudden, all the things in the back of their mind that they're like, well, yeah, I mean, even though we're making the strategy, we could probably still do the stuff that we want to do. But there's only one homepage. There's only one hero. There's only one H1. There's one body. Maybe you have 3 sentences to work with. And so to get a whole company to agree what goes on my 3 sentences on the one singular homepage with the URL, the only one that exists for our business, like I go to whatever anthropic.com, what's on those 3 sentences? If you can get people to agree on that, the likelihood that everyone's going to be charging in the same direction for a while, it's just exponentially higher. So I always try to remind people that of like going through a positioning exercise, the goal of it is not to come out with some sort of copy. I think for us, what we've discovered is tying a positioning exercise to a homepage refresh or website refresh in general makes it easier for us to buy, right? Like people can buy us and they get it. They're like, oh, this is a great time to engage someone like Anthony and his team because we're going through this website refresh and we need to figure out these fundamental questions. But I'm always trying to counterbalance that by saying the point of this is not a conversion rate bump, right? Like the point of this is to say, can we get the whole company charging in one direction? And can we get it simple enough that it could be on the top level homepage and just simple enough in our brains that you could tell someone at a networking event, this is what our company does. This is who we're going after. This is the problem we solve. All those kind of core questions. So that's why those two things go together in our opinion, but they can create confusion where some people think, well, the point of this whole thing is just the homepage and what's the conversion rate going to be?
Yeah, I was going to ask you, like, does it pigeonhole them too much? But then I think you've also spoken about how it can be an artifact that can then be leveraged across the board and for a much longer period of time rather than being like a 50-page messaging marketing branding doc that nobody ever reads. Fair enough. An adjacent tangent that I had in my mind was for a product, let's say like a Replit or a N8N or a Lovable that are, of course, that are horizontal products, but they're not horizontal in the traditional sense because yes, a lot of different people can use them for different use cases, but really from the business outcome perspective, it's not really trying to be horizontal. You're trying to probably talk to a specific use case or a specific persona. With a lot, like with the AI companies that you work with that may be slightly non-deterministic, it's not like one target segment or like one type of use case that comes out of it. Are you facing a problem like that now? Is the framework slightly different for them, or do you still feel like that's the exact same? Because to my mind, something like a Lovable or a Replit or an 8N will have a different problem than a Calendly or a Miro or a Figma. But yeah, we'd
Yeah.
love to know what you think.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's a couple things you could think about, right? Like, do think that depends where you slice it. So, like, let's take Zapier. Depending on how you frame it, Zapier either has infinite use cases or it has one use case. So the one use case is I need to create automations between SaaS apps. Right? I need to take Google and what, you know. So if I frame it like that, there really is just one use case of Zapier. I'm trying to automate between my SaaS apps. If you say, well, why are you trying to automate between SaaS apps? Or like, what specifically are you automating? Well, I need Google Calendar to create this event when someone booked. And now all of a sudden we have infinite use cases. So it really just depends. Another one, Whisperflow, is an AI, is a voice dictation, right? So you could say Whisperflow has infinite use cases. Or you could say basically it's for people who are typing, writing something, and they want to do it faster, and now they can do it with their voice. It just has one. So even an Anthropic, right? Like what made Sam Altman kill 10 of their products? Because Anthropic was kind of going all in on AI coding. So you could argue the fastest growing company in history that went from, what was it, 1 billion to 19 billion in 5 months or something of revenue. This isn't, valuation or something, true revenue, effectively went to market with one big use case, enterprise coding, right? Like, so, and then you have Sam Altman being like, I'm killing Sora, I'm killing the web browser because I spread myself too thin. And you're like, that's coming from the guy who just raised what, $130 billion or something. He's trying to do $1 trillion. So if Anthropic starts to beat OpenAI by niching down to a use case, maybe the startups can as well, right? Again, and it all depends on you spin it. Because if you said, well, what specifically is Anthropic coding? Or why specifically are, it's like, okay, well, now we have infinite. But if you really look at what's really driving the growth of Anthropic, it's enterprise coding. It's effectively one use case. And so for us, we're like, niching down does not mean you have to niche down to a tiny single moment in time point solution. It means niching down to something that is understandable, that it's like, oh, I get that. Even with ChatGPT, right? You could argue the use case was like chatting or getting getting answers or whatever it might be. So I think that's on one side of something to think about. Like we talk about, in this new world, everyone can do everything. But I think the amazing case study of watching Anthropic just eat OpenAI's lunch and forcing even Sam Altman to say, wow, we have a focus problem, which is ironic given he's behind Y Combinator and they've been telling companies they need to focus for the last 20 or 30 years under his leadership. And he's like, well, I don't need to do that, obviously. And even he now is like, oh, shoot, even I need to do it. And I have raised more money than any company in the history of the world. So I think that's on one side. The other thing, though, to just think about is that for our context, positioning is trying to solve primarily a marketing, like a mass marketing problem. And we need positioning the most as a company when we're going to be operating in traditional sales and marketing places, right? So if you think of the channels of how to grow your software company, let's imagine you have to use traditional sales and marketing. You're going to have to do things like ads. You're going to have to try to take advantage of organic algorithms of content. You're going to have to do like outbound sales. You're going to have to hire account executives to go and, send cold calls. All of these things, any of these channels are extremely saturated. They're extremely expensive and they're very difficult to get to work. And so if you're a small startup, you don't have infinite resources. You probably are going to have to figure out a positioning strategy. Because if you try to do a bunch of stuff, and that's the constraint, is you're going to have to use all these saturated channels, you will physically not have enough money and time and resources to penetrate any of them. And every time you add a new use case, you split the message because each use case is going to have its own set of competitors, its own set of problems, its own value statement. And so if your product, which most software products are, is flexible and can do a lot of different use cases, you're going to effectively have multiple marketing strategies you have to run concurrently, which can get really expensive. But some of these products, like for example, I was listening to a podcast where the head of growth at Anthropic was being interviewed, as if the growth of Anthropic is by some sort of thing that one guy is doing. Like, come on, like it's this stuff at some level with this revolutionary new tech, it is kind of growing itself. And yes, they made these early on decisions of we're not going to do image generation, we're not going to futz around with all this crazy stuff, AI sex bots that ChatGPT and OpenAI are trying to do. Like Anthropic's like, we have no interest in that. We're going to go way down into this one. And then the product has been kind of growing itself in many ways. And because of the hoopla around AI, Dario is getting all these conversations with governments and everything like that. So some of these people are just in spaces where the average startup does not have this level of, momentum. And I'm like, is the marketing of Anthropic really driving its growth? Probably not. It's more like all these other things that are happening. But for the rest of us mere mortals who don't have these immediate time to value products, like especially most of the AI companies that we work with have to go through some sort of implementation period before the customer gets any value. So they're not like a standard chat bot, right? It's like we have to come in, we have to connect all your systems. We're going to build out our context layer on top of whatever you're doing. We're going to create these bespoke agents. We're going to meet with your subject matter experts to figure out how best to employ them. Then we're going to have a period of time where we're going through these cycles of iterating and make them better. Like all that stuff happens before a single amount of value is delivered. So those people are going to have to do the positioning really well because they can't just be like, try my chatbot and instantly get value, create this snowball effect. So I think all those
Okay,
things
let
work
me let
together.
me let me put like a pin in that and ask you one thing that I'm really curious about because you're talking about like working with AI founders. Given the amount of anxiety a AI founder has today with the kind of startup they're building, especially niching down on a specific target audience and then figuring out PMF within that specific lane, and then 6 months later, Anthropic eats their lunch, right? It might not be true. And I think in most cases, it probably might not be true. However, the anxiety is real. They do think about that. So when you're talking to a founder like that is anxious that their lunch is going to be eaten by Claude or GPT in 6 months, how do you convince them or how do you talk to them? And how do you strategize with them to still niche down, to still select a lane and then stick with it?
I think that let's take Lovable as an example. To me, the core job to be done of Lovable was build apps. Like that's how I got introduced to it. I think most people think about it that way. So Anthropic just released an app builder. You could argue, oh man, Lovable's screwed. But theoretically, someone may still pick Lovable over Anthropic because Lovable is more specialized. That they've really gone in and they've really created this. And it's like, okay, again, watching OpenAI try to get into all these spaces and fail should give hope to the smaller startup that says, I'm willing to specialize and really own this corner and build out all the functionality that's going to be too annoying for the big company to really go into my space and figure this out. Unfortunately, Lovable recently said, we're adding AI agents and we're adding chat and we're going to create, they're doing the opposite. They're going to try to become Anthropic and OpenAI, which to me is the death sentence. Because now we have no reason to pick Lovable over Anthropic anymore because you're not specialized anymore. So I do think that the specialization argument is one of the only levers a small company has. Like, for example, we just worked with a AI agent company that's building AI agents for field service companies. So companies that have a giant robotics and things that they sell to customers, and they have to have very specialized people go out to fix these robots. This company is building the AI for those people who are on the ground and are trying to fix some giant complex machinery and are looking through the AI to figure out why is it not working? What's keeping this from turning back on or whatever it is. To me, and like the amount of stuff that this company had built, infrastructure, context layer, all that stuff, proprietary data that they're getting from these companies, it's like, that's just like, it's too small of a market for Anthropic to really care about. Like, are they really going to dedicate, they've got, I don't know how many thousands of employees now, but they don't have 1 million employees. And all these AI companies are like, we want to keep our employees as small as humanly possible. We want to fire more humans. So I don't think that they're going to go out and build this ridiculously robust field service AI agent offering, which makes me think this company has a shot because if I'm a field service company, well, yeah, I could get the off the shelf Anthropic thing, but then I'm going to have to rebuild it for my business. They don't speak my language. Also, I'm a small fish in a big pond. Like, they don't give a rip about my company. Even if I'm a big company in the field service space, they don't care. But this company over here feels like they're dedicated to me. They're devoted to my needs. So I'm going to talk to them. And to me, that's the only angle is, yes, you could try to go be horizontal and face the big guys on their own playing field, but you're going to lose because they have so much more funding that you'll never be able to compete. But if you specialize, you still have a chance. And so for me, Level, when they announced this, their founder was like, we're adding agents, we're going. I was like, you guys had a great run. It's over. Like, you're dead. You're dead in the water. You can't compete at that level. You could have competed if you stayed around just apps, really doubled down. But, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. And it's also like this, there's something that you're known for. And I know you've used the Salesforce example for this, that, Salesforce, to my mind, is a CRM. Are they only a CRM? Probably not. Probably they could do a million things. So sort of the natural counter to that, and then sort of the extrapolation at that point is this idea of category creation, right? Which is you're either trying to create a category or be a part of one. And whichever one has the higher TAM or the higher revenue potential, you're running towards that. So when a company's how do you decipher when a company is actually building a category genuinely and is going to be successful at that, or they're better off going niche and probably becoming part of a category? Like, I want to understand where somebody's bullshitting and when somebody's actually positioning themselves to create a category. So yeah, I'd love to know what you think. Yeah.
I think when it comes to category creation, there's sort of two ways you can do it. One of them is infinitely harder than the other one. It's really starting with, okay, we're not going to be in an existing category. We're going to pitch ourselves as a new type of software. To me, the type of category creation that is way easier and way less expensive is to find a pre-existing job to be done or use case of somebody doing something, and there isn't a great dedicated tool for it, right? They're doing it with a manual process or something. And then basically say, I'm going to create software that is helping people with this specific job to be done. Take the company Vanta. So very fast growing, they went around this job to be done of preparing for a SOC 2 audit. And they basically said, there's no real software for this. What if we created that software? And then over time, they create the category. And now there's Vanta and Drata and all these other players that effectively help people get SOC 2, compliant. And to me, what makes it easy is you start with an existing job to be done and create the category for it. You mentioned before, Calendly is a great example. People are scheduling meetings online, and then you create the scheduling tool, and then you create the category. They ride that out from $1 to, I think they're doing like 270 million or something like that now as the big one. And the category is created. The infinitely harder version of category creation is when you say, first have to create the job to be done. Before I could create the category, I have to create effectively the activities that would be necessary. So a good example of this is Clay, more recent company. Clay goes to market and says, our product does a million things. I don't know how to sell this. What if we say all these adjacent things that it does could bubble up to this new job to be done, which we call GTM engineering? And they had to create that job, and not even just like a conceptual job, the real job, like the role that you hire for a GTM engineer now, that these companies are like, I want to go hire someone. So they were able to create a category around a new job that they had to create first. And they were able to do this because they raised hundreds of millions of dollars. They had this incredible groundswell of users on the ground floor that like early adopters, tinkerers, they had this really robust Slack community that was getting all these people building all these things. And they basically like created this evangelism around this bottoms up approach. And then we're able to go top down and say, actually, all these people who've been in our Slack channel, they're actually GTM engineers. This is a new role. You should adopt this. Big Silicon Valley companies buy into the concept, they start hiring for it, gets more hoopla. And then all of a sudden we have a category there. And now there's other companies coming out that are doing similar things, trying to be like, no, we're actually the GTM engineering platform. So that's much, much harder to do. And then the thing that people often will do is they're in a category, they don't like that they are losing, and then they'll just come up with a new name. They'll make no underlying changes to their product and say, I created a category. My favorite example, DocuSign. We think of DocuSign as something like e-signature, which is a category they truly pioneered at the beginning. They're the number one e-signature provider. And then eventually other people start coming into that category. They're doing the same thing. And then DocuSign says, well, we're no longer e-signature. Now we're intelligent agreement management. What did they change in the product to justify this new thing? Pretty much nothing. All they did was come up with a new name, slap it on their website, launch it, make a big fuss about it online. And then everyone made fun of them because they were like, it's the same thing. You didn't change anything. So in those cases, that's what I think most people do when they are doing category creation is someone in a boardroom says, we keep losing to all these competitors. Let's create a new category. And they just create a new name. That's not the same thing either. So those would be kind of the three ways, I guess you could say. One doesn't work.
Would you say that there is currently this issue of there's a lot of AI euphoria, and there are people that are going to be early adopters that, regardless of whether your product actually solves the problem or not, people are adopting it and maybe they're using it and they're tinkering with it and maybe they're continually tinkering with it, where maybe your retention cohort one was supposed to actually be maybe 5 days, but ends up being 5 months because everybody is just so into tinkering and being an early adopter. And they almost have this anxiety of, if I don't continually do something about AI, I'm going to be left behind. How does a company, an AI company specifically, decipher between we're actually moving towards PMF compared to we've just created something cool that people are using unusually longer than they normally would?
Yeah. I think it depends where you set the bounds of what is the market, right? So if we're saying product market fit, I think you can find product market fit in a lot of different size markets, right? So like if you're a kid, let's say you live in an apartment building and you provide, like IT services. There was a guy, he lived in, I shouldn't say guy, he was like a younger middle schooler who lived in our neighborhood and would help all the old ladies and old, grandpas and stuff, like set up their TVs and set up their computers, and was like IT service. Effectively in this tiny little neighborhood, he had product market fit, right? Like he would go around, all these people would think about him. Like, right. If you're a handyman in an apartment building that most of the people in the building, and you're like, that's my market, is my apartment building. Most people use you probably have product market fit. So it's all relative, right, to the market that you're going after. I think with a lot of the AI companies, it's the same thing. If you want to target the LinkedIn bubble, you may have product market fit right now. If you want to target the rest of the world, there was a recent survey they did where AI was ranked, I think in America, less favorably than ICE, the like the immigration enforcement, which is one of the most hated groups in the world right now. AI was ranked even less than that in favorability. So there's this dichotomy where you have people in this little LinkedIn bubble in Silicon Valley and Mountain View who are like, oh, I'm falling behind. I need to do it. I'm tinkering every day. And then you have the rest of the world who's like, this is the most evil thing ever created that's coming to destroy all of society. So again, do you have product market fit? It kind of depends on which market you're going after, right? You could slice and dice it in a lot of different ways. And so I think that's where I think it's important to set those bounds at the beginning of who actually are we trying to win over? Are we trying to win over startups and Y Combinator, or are we trying to win over actual businesses out in the world?
Do you feel like that's the propagation of, you live in this bubble and you think that you have product market fit, or you've made it essentially from the general metrics of business outcome, especially when you're talking to a startup that got into YC and then raised
Yeah.
money and now is going forward. And you talk about this difference between sometimes how clear a bootstrap founder is compared to a VC founder. Can you reiterate a story from working with a bootstrap founder compared to working with a VC founder? And why do you feel like one generally has more success over the other?
This is not a company we worked with, but I know the founder. So there's a guy, he's really big on LinkedIn. His name's Adam Robinson. He has a company called RB2B, and RB2B effectively does website de-anonymization. So you land on someone's website, it makes a guess about your IP address and where you're calling from, and it makes an educated guess of who you might be based on all these cookies and things that it has. And then it finds the LinkedIn profile associated with that guess and then sends it via Slack to the company to see who theoretically is on your website. Adam launches this product. It goes live. It immediately viral, and he has a huge audience, so he has built-in distribution. It immediately goes viral, and then overnight, 1 million pop-ups, other copycat companies appear, and people who are adding this. So Adam is a bootstrapper. He's very committed to the bootstrapping way of life. He previously built this company called retention.com, which I think does 20 or 25 million a year fully bootstrapped. And now this is, I think, his second or third company. So the other day I saw he posted, he's very like build in public and transparency and stuff like that. Our B2B, I think, is doing 7 million ARR. If you go on their website, it's effectively still just the website de-anonymization thing. Even the hero, I checked like 2 days ago. It's like uncover 80% of your website traffic, see the profiles, send them to Slack. He's basically been doing just this one thing since the beginning. All of his competitors, most of them VC backed, they go to their investors and the investors are like, you need to build a big platform. We want to see you selling $1 million contracts or $500,000 contracts, which means you have to have a big platform sale. So they went and they built their big platforms. And then they were like, oh, we can just add the our B2B feature to our platform and then we'll win, right? Because like, obviously that's going to work. But if you actually think about it, there's a lot of people who just want that one feature and functionality, who don't want the giant Frankenstein platform that the company built. And so most of the companies that are competing with him in the space that stole his idea and put it in their product are doing less in annual recurring revenue than he is. With their big platform, they are doing less than the tiny little thing that he's doing, precisely because it is so simple and easy to understand the thing he's offering. And he's getting it to so many more people who would want it than the people over here. So it's like, yes, maybe the other platforms can do the same thing, but it's buried within a giant complicated platform and product that I have to talk to a sales team to get to. And then, so it's like some people are like, I don't want all that. I already have my sales tech stack. I just want this new capability. Adam's product, I follow him on LinkedIn. I'm just going to get it. So I think this can be, just like an object lesson where it's like, it's not always better to do more things. Sometimes it's better to do the one thing for more people. We see this like in a lot of, there's a concept called signal-based outbound, where you look to see signals so people might be interested. And all the signals companies they have tunnel vision. They're all looking at Silicon Valley and the startup high growth B2B SaaS venture-backed space. And they're all doing this arms race where they're constantly adding new things, doing more. And for them, they're like, oh, it's like a cutthroat red ocean. It's like every day they steal our features and we got to add more. And it's going back and forth and they're getting into these conversations and it's this whole thing. And then you're like, how many people outside of the bubble are using signal-based outbound? Like I'm talking like the insurance company on your, down in your little town, or, like literally any of the small businesses in the world. Like how many of them are using signal-based outbound? And the vast majority of them have no idea what that concept even is. Where it's like, some of these companies that started with a very simple version of signals-based outbound have made it so big and complicated, primarily to meet the investor expectations, where it's like, actually, if you just went back to where you were 5 years ago and just started marketing it to the rest of the world, you probably would clean up. And like I'm seeing it with Adam, where he's not adding all these things. He's keeping it ridiculously narrow and his revenue just keeps ticking up. And these other ones are all languishing in like the $5 million range, despite having these massive enterprise platforms. So maybe that's a long answer, but that's where I feel like I'm seeing it super obvious.
No, I think it's super helpful because a lot of the founders that even I talk to, they're like, I'm afraid of niching down, even though traditionally speaking, this is not new advice by any sense of the matter. However, it is something that they're more anxious about because they see examples of companies failing and not working out. And then, ChatGPT apparently does the same thing better. And then they're confused about whether, what they were doing was right or wrong, rather than understanding you never niche down. You never really understood what pain point you were solving. And that's why you died. It had nothing to do with, GPT or Claude eating your business, but it seems like a sexy answer to a VC. Like, okay, we were not putting enough money or we were not putting enough conviction within the problem. Makes sense. Okay, I did want to ask, like, has it ever happened that you work with a founder and you figure out the positioning and they also agree with that positioning initially, but then they sort of relapse back to something that sounds cool within a certain peer group? And then, work that you did over the 2-3 weeks to work with them cycles back to something that shouldn't have been the case. And this could be a founder, this could be a new CRO or a new CMO that comes in. They're like, no, this is not how we want to talk about the product because it doesn't make enough money. We don't want to talk about it X way or Y way. And then they come back to you and they're like, okay, shit's hit the fan now. Anthony, help us. Has this ever happened to you? And if yes, how do you talk to somebody like that? How do you help somebody like
Yeah, I mean, it totally happens. We tell people, we say the positioning strategy, it's only going to make a difference if you stick with it. And we try to give people enough understandings of that coming in before they start, of like, are you prepared to make a 12-month bet? Or do you need time to experiment? If you don't feel like, with the information that you have now, that if you got all your best people into a room with us as an external facilitator, that you could come to a decision of where you're going to charge for at least 12 months. If you don't feel like you have that conviction, don't do a positioning sprint. You're not ready to position, which is fine, right? You can just keep experimenting. Sometimes startups will have a runway consideration, like, we need to make this work. And again, if you're operating in these saturated channels like cold email and paid ads and paid search and all those things, this is not something that you can snap your fingers and it's going to work. This is going to take at least 6 to 12 months of iteration. And then by that point, ideally, you're getting new clients coming in, booking sales calls with you because of the new positioning. And then your sales cycle might be another 6, 12 months, right? Like, depending on how big the service is and how much they have to actually pay. So we always tell them, like, this is a conviction thing. Like, you need to be willing to stick with this. And if you go and just start pivoting back and forth, it's not going to work. It's also too, like, this is another thing. I can't remember who said this originally, but like, if you sell products to middle schoolers or kids in junior high, on average, if they like a product, they will tell 10 other people. If you sell products to adults, if they like the product, on average, they'll tell one person, if that. Most of them will tell no one. So this is why a lot of companies that we see, they'll be going for about 3 to 5 years and they'll say, everyone still thinks about us of how we were 3 or 5 years ago. I'm like, because it takes really long to hear about a company and then internalize it and be like, oh, they're the company that is blank. And so each pivot that you make every 2 months, it's not really doing anything, right? It's like if there's a band that gets famous from they're like a country artist or something. They have a famous country song. And then, they have like some random song they release that's like a jazz song. And then they have a random song that they release of a hip hop song. And then they have a random song that they release that's a metal song. Like, everyone is still going to think of them as a country artist, even if they're like, oh, I'm pivoting every week and I changed my positioning. Everyone's like, no, you're a country artist. Like, I know you're at big album. I know like, okay, so you rebranded for a second, like, nobody cares. So it's just, that's, I think, what I see most frequently in these cases is when people are pivoting too fast, and we try to warn them. And sometimes they come back to us and want to run it again. And a lot of times, if they want to run it again, we say, there's no need. Like, we already discussed everything. You guys just lacked the conviction to stick with it. You picked a direction because you knew these other ones were not going to work. And then you got cold feet. Like, you don't need to have more meetings to tell you that, hey, these are the options. They're the same ones we already evaluated, So a lot of times it's just,
Yeah.
will you? And like, I've had founders come back to me and say, we backpedaled, we went this other way, and then eventually we came back to what we had decided with you, and now it's going great. And it's like, well, okay, you could have saved yourself the heartache. But
I did want to understand because I feel like this is something you haven't talked a lot about, but it's definitely something that a lot of startups think about is where does pricing play into the positioning? And then when a startup is trying to decipher what their pricing strategy should be in conjunction with their positioning, how do you help teams build that out? Is there a framework? Is there a checklist? Is there like maybe, let's say, a list of things that a team can do in conjunction with good positioning that can really nail down their pricing, eventually increasing revenue?
yeah, I have a controversial take on this, and I think almost all software is too expensive. And I've seen this over and over and over again. It's really funny. I met with a former client. Her name's Bethany. She's very, very sharp. And she said it in like a great way that I had never conceptualized it this way, but now it's stuck with me so much that basically the reason so many executives in software companies are very nervous about being open and honest with the product actually is and does, like, because we're coming from a customer perspective. We're like, a customer reads your website and they just want to know, what the hell is this thing, right? What does it do? And every company tries their hardest to hide what they do and what it actually is. And so she pointed out, it's because if you really get down to what a company is doing and you really were honest about it, and this is actually what the product does, it will almost always signal a price decrease, because we've sold to the investors that we are doing something much more revolutionary than we actually are. Most products are not actually doing that much interesting stuff. And so If you really are just open about it and you say it and you put it out there in its starkest form, it likely will mean you're charging too much. And when you got to the price in the first place, a big reason people end up charging so much is A, because they tell the investors that they can, helps them raise the money. But B, like I was saying before, the cost of distribution is so high. So for example, are you basically, by setting your price so high, are you making the customers subsidize your expensive account executives? That effectively, if you're like, the only way to get the word out is to hire account executives who are making 200, 300,000 a year to go sell my product. Well, obviously I'm gonna have to sell such high expense platform level stuff to justify the salaries because I don't know how to do marketing. I don't know how to get the word out. I can't take advantage of any of the organic channels. So it's this like vicious cycle where we need to fund the AEs to run the outbound, which is so expensive. And then we need to pitch a high level platform thing to get our VCs excited. But then in the reality, what actually does the product do? Oh, it's relatively simple. Oh, it's kind of like a spreadsheet with some nice dashboards. Okay, this is not that interesting. And then that's where we see this big meeting of the minds where they basically say, the customer says, when they get to the bottom of it, they're like, wait a minute, what do you want to charge me? And what is it? And then the company goes back and they're like, oh, we're not telling a good enough ROI story. We need to make it seem even bigger. And then they just go or they update the website, increase your revenue. We're going to grow your business. Because they're like, that's going to solve the problem. And for me, for the longest time, I was like, why are you charging so much? And then they're like, well, our hands are tied. We have to because the VCs want it. And that's what we told them it was going to be. And we have all these expensive salespeople. And I'm like, but you might not need the expensive salespeople if you simplified the messaging and you lowered the price. You might actually be able to get a lot more customers and end up being more profitable, have higher revenue. But people get in these buckets, right? And marketing is scary. And it's easier to just be like, I'm just going to hire a bunch of account executives and go out there and pay them a ton of money to cold call a million people. So it's this vicious cycle. In general, I do think that most startups would be better off lowering the price because, I don't think the value is there. I think we sell people a lot of BS. Like, not to bring up Calendly again, but there was a message that they had on their website. They were like, get Calendly and you'll hit quota as a salesperson. And I'm like, that's it? That's what's preventing why 90% of your reps are not hitting quotas? You're not using Calendly? Like, come on. It's just not
Yeah,
believable. But they want to sell it for more money. So they have to tell a story that is nonsense.
true. No, 100%. Yeah, just on the Calendly note, even I stopped using Calendly for scheduling.
What do
Built
you
my
use
own
now?
tool. I
Nice.
built my own tool because I also feel like when you're niching down that much, you really have to make sense of where you're really fitting in, especially now when building personal software for very tiny specific use cases is like extremely easy. Awesome. Anthony, it was really, I think, one of the more hopefully or unique experiences you've had on a podcast. Hopefully, our listeners agree with that as well. And I think we covered a lot of bases in different ways of looking at positioning. So I'm really glad. And thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. Super fun convo.
Awesome. GM to everyone who tuned in. See you in the next episode. Bye bye.